They do what countless men in history do when they're out of a job. They go to a bar. They pick the Apollo Room because it's big enough to hold the assembly, and from this tavern, the call for the Continental Congress happened. Brian Austin, James Madison interpreter. A bar doesn't usually sound like the birthplace of a revolution, but in 18th century Virginia, it was exactly that. Hello, I'm Clarissa Sanders, and this is Clarissa Explains, a podcast that explores historical events and why they matter. This season, we are commemorating the 250th anniversary of the founding of the United States by taking a look at some historical sites throughout Virginia and their roles during the American Revolution. When we talk about the American Revolution in Virginia, there are countless places to begin, from battlefields and grand colonial homes to indigenous landscapes and the spaces where Black Virginians lived, worked, and resisted. This season, we're going to explore all of those stories. In fact, each month we'll explore a different theme and the sites that tell those stories. This month, though, we're looking at the seeds of revolution and the places where revolutionary thought and action started right here in Virginia. For me, there was just one place I wanted to start this season, and it had to be with a tavern. Taverns were kind of a one-stop shop that provided patrons with a place to sleep, eat, read the news, play games, and of course, talk to one another about current events and issues. This made taverns the perfect setting for revolutionary discussions and the perfect place to start this season. Today, we're going to take a look at the one and only Raleigh Tavern in Williamsburg, Virginia, and explore what happened there and why it matters. As colonies like Virginia continued to grow and expand westward, there was a need for accommodations along the main travel routes. These businesses went by several different names, such as inns, ordinaries, public houses, tippling houses, and of course, taverns. While their main function was to provide food and drinks and sleeping accommodations for patrons, taverns also kind of served as an unofficial community center where travelers and locals alike could play games, socialize, and talk about local news. Larger taverns had the ability to provide even more services, such as club activities, social events like balls, dinners, and lectures, spaces for political and civic meetings, and even commercial activities like public auctions. Taverns varied in size, but often downstairs had at least one room that served as a common area for dining and socializing, and one room upstairs that served as sleeping quarters. While it may seem strange to modern audiences, privacy in bedrooms and sleeping were a lot different than they are today. It was common for people to share rooms and even beds. Beyond the main structure, though, taverns had an array of outbuildings, also called dependencies, such as kitchens, wells, smokehouses, dairies, and stables to support them, and even gardens, pastures, and orchards. A tavern size obviously dictated how many people it took to run them. In some cases, the establishments were owned by people of means, but were operated by tavern keepers. While many tavern keepers were men, women who were widowed or who were unmarried and fatherless also had the ability to run taverns. Wives also played a crucial part in the operations, often overseeing the tasks such as domestic work. Much of the backbreaking labor that kept taverns running, from cooking, cleaning, tending animals, and more, were done by enslaved individuals. Their work made these spaces possible, even as they were excluded from the political conversations happening inside them. We'll come back to some of their stories later in the episode. On Duke of Gloucester Street in Williamsburg, near the colonial capital, sits a reconstructed Raleigh Tavern. The tavern is an L-shaped weatherboard building that sits on the footprint of the original 18th century building. The first portions of the tavern were built around 1717 after Thomas Jones acquired the property. The tavern started off pretty humbly, likely similar to many domestic structures in colonial Virginia at the time. We know that from about 1717 to 1730, Henry Babcock was operating a tavern in this modern structure. Around 1733 to 1735, the tavern expanded when what is called the South Passage and billiard rooms were added. This addition completed the front-facing portion of the building that can be seen from the street. In 1749, the building underwent construction again when the north section was connected to another structure, likely a standalone billiards hall that already existed on the property. At some point after this, a shed was added to the rear. These additions changed the once modestly sized tavern into a large establishment that was able to host balls, banquets, and various other types of private and recreational gatherings. The final additions were made around 1782 when a room was added on the northeastern portion of the tavern. But the story of the Raleigh Tavern isn't just about architecture or political meetings, it's also about the people who labored to sustain it. Throughout its history, enslaved workers were responsible for much of the daily operations that kept the tavern running. In 1783, shortly after the last additions were made to the building, a German visitor commented that black cooks, butlers, and chambermaids who worked at the tavern, quote, made their bows with dignity and modesty. The number of enslaved laborers likely varied depending on who owned the tavern, but we do know that in 1770, when the owner Anthony Hay passed, 20 enslaved individuals were listed as living and working for him. On January 17, 1770, in an advertisement in the Virginia Gazette that also listed furniture and livestock for sale, it stated before the Raleigh doors, 19 individuals were to be sold. By looking at Hay's inventory, we can assume that those 19 people were Lucy, Peggy, Ben, Lucy, Jim, Ginny, Caesar, Gabby, Rachel, Ripon, Jerry, Wilshire, Sarah, Mary, Tom, Kate, Betty, Nancy, and Edmund. Will was the only one not included in the sale right outside the tavern because he was sold to the tavern's new owner, James Southall. And yet, for all the stories we are able to piece together of the people who passed through the halls of the Raleigh Tavern, the building itself didn't remain intact. So how do we know how the tavern changed over time? Through a combination of archaeological evidence, archival documents, and visual records like drawings and sketches. Although the original structure survived until the 19th century, it was ultimately lost to a fire in December 1859. So how did the reconstructed Raleigh Tavern that stands on Duke of Gloucester Street come to be? Reverend Dr. W.A.R. Goodwin wanted to preserve what was left of the colonial structures that survived in Williamsburg, which was the colonial capital of Virginia leading up to and during the beginning of the American Revolution. Goodwin shared his vision with John D. Rockefeller Jr. and his wife Abby Aldrich Rockefeller in the 1920s. Soon the vision grew, and the team decided to go beyond just saving what was left, but to completely restore Williamsburg. In 1932, Colonial Williamsburg opened its first public exhibition, which was the recreated Raleigh Tavern. But why did they start there? In the 1760s, the British government passed a series of taxes imposed on the American colonies in order to support the costs that were accrued from the 7 Years' War and to continue to keep British soldiers in North America. These acts included the Sugar Act of 1764, the Currency Act also in 1764, the Stamp Act in 1765, and the Townshend Acts in 1767. By the spring of 1769, members of the Virginian governing body known as the House of Burgesses had enough. George Mason and George Washington met to create a non-importation plan. Virginia's economy during this time was uniquely dependent on trade with Great Britain. Virginians traded with them directly more than other colonies due to the lack of manufacturing and relied pretty heavily on British merchants purchasing their agricultural products. Mason and Washington had this in mind when they created their plan. They focused on dissuading colonists from purchasing luxury goods and other goods above a certain price point, but they didn't include less expensive items that northern colonies did, like the inexpensive cloth that was often purchased to make clothes for enslaved laborers. They brought this proposal to the House of Burgesses. They held a secret session and on May 16th passed resolve speaking out on British taxes. They said, quote, resolved, that the sole right of imposing taxes on the inhabitants of His Majesty's colony and dominion of Virginia is now and ever hath been legally and constitutionally vested in the House of Burgesses. The following day, on May 17th, the Virginia Royal Governor dissolved the House of Burgesses. The Burgesses gathered at the one and only Raleigh Tavern to create a non-importation association. The tavern, which is just a short walk from the Capitol building, was a natural setting for these conversations because taverns like it already served as places for people to gather and discuss the issues of the day. The resolution written by this group is pretty lengthy, so I don't want to read it in full, but I do want to share that the authors were intentional in starting by pointing out that they were colonists who were dutiful subjects that were loyal to the king, but they were writing because decisions made by Parliament were going to have a significant and negative impact on the economy of Virginia. They said that they were, quote, being deeply affected by the grievances and distresses with which His Majesty's American subjects are oppressed, and the dreading the evils which threaten the ruin of ourselves and our posterity by reducing us from a free and happy people to a wretched and miserable state of slavery. This resolution was signed by notable Virginians including Peyton Randolph, Richard Henry Lee, George Washington, and Thomas Jefferson. In 1772 and 1773, tensions between the colonies and the royal government continued to escalate. In June of 1772, the much-despised British schooner known as the Gatsby ran aground on an anti-smuggling raid on the coast of Rhode Island when chasing the merchant ship the Hannah. The captain of the Hannah, Benjamin Lindsay, let prominent Patriot citizens know that the ship was stuck. About 50 men then set off towards the Gatsby. They boarded the ship, looted it, shot the captain in the groin, and then proceeded to set it on fire. The British were outraged and created a special commission to investigate the incident. Some colonists believed that this violated a citizen's right to a trial by jury, further increasing tensions. News of the incident reached the colonists in Virginia in about late 1772. In March of 1773, the General Assembly met in Williamsburg, giving a small but radical group of burgesses the chance to meet at Raleigh Tavern to privately discuss the events and devise a plan. This group included the brothers Francis Lightfoot Lee and Richard Henry Lee, Patrick Henry, Thomas Jefferson, and his brother Dabney Carr. They drafted a resolution to establish a committee of correspondence and called for other colonies to do the same so they had a means to share news with one another and to work together to protect their rights. Committees of correspondence had existed in the colonies prior to this, but their role was to share news back and forth with England, not between the colonies. The resolution was presented to the House of Burgesses and accepted unanimously. The new committee got to work right away, sending letters to England and to other colonies to find out more information about the Gatsby incident and asking the other colonies to form their own committees. The colonies responded in kind, with 11 out of the 13 creating their own committees, strengthening the ties between them. This also means that there was a system of sharing news established when on December 16, 1773, when a group of patriots known as the Sons of Liberty dumped 342 chests of tea into the Boston harbor while dressed like Indians. News of the Boston Tea Party quickly spread through the colonies. In the spring of 1774, Parliament passed the Coercive Acts, also known as the Intolerable Acts, to punish Massachusetts. On May 24, 1774, the Virginia House of Burgesses passed a resolution calling for a day of fasting and prayer in support of Boston. The royal governor, Lord Dunmore, responded by dissolving the House of Burgesses, and so they met again at Raleigh Tavern on May 27th to create a plan. When news reached Williamsburg that the port in Boston had been closed, the Burgesses that remained in Williamsburg met at the tavern again, and on May 30th created a document calling for a convention so Virginia could decide on official response. It read, "At a meeting of 25 of the late representatives legally assembled by the moderator, it was agreed that letters be wrote to all of our sister colonies, acknowledging the receipt of the letters and resolves from Boston, etc., informing them that before the same came to hand, the Virginia Assembly had been unexpectedly dissolved, and most of the members returned to their respective counties." It went on to say that this is the opinion of all the late House of Burgesses who could be convened on the present occasion, that the colony of Virginia will concur with the other colonies in such measures as shall be judged most effectual for the preservation of the common rights and liberty of British America. In August, the Virginia Convention met and made two major decisions. 1, they chose to support a general boycott, and 2, they picked representatives that attended what would be the First Continental Congress. The May meeting at Raleigh Tavern was a significant step towards Virginia's path towards revolution. So why does the Raleigh Tavern matter? As we've discussed, it served as a setting for some of the most important revolutionary conversations in Virginia, and many of the people who were at the heart of these discussions are people we all know, like Patrick Henry, Thomas Jefferson, and George Washington. But I think it goes beyond that. So why does that matter to us now in 2026? For me, the Raleigh Tavern is a great reminder that democracy relies on action outside of formal systems. Yes, We should all participate in formal systems like voting in local, state, and federal elections and serving on juries. But we should also be in conversation with one another about current events and issues and take action when needed. That doesn't mean we all need to meet in a tavern when we take issue with decisions being made, but it does mean that we should be involved. When the time comes, you should call your representatives, sign petitions, and protest. The Raleigh Tavern shows that change doesn't happen just with great speeches, but when informed citizens come together and participate in civil dialogue and take action together, you never know what changes you're going to make in your community. Thank you for listening to Clarissa Explains. I am so happy to be back and to be sharing stories of some of my favorite historic sites in Virginia. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to follow and leave a review so fellow history lovers can find us. For show notes on today's episode or more information about the show, please visit our website at clarissaexplains.org. Until next time, remember, understanding history starts with asking the right questions, and we're here to explain it one story at a time.